Hey guys, hope you're doing well. My name is Malcolm. I'm going to be the new coach here at Kick and Bass. And so for this first tutorial, I'm going to be breaking down my track in Ibiza that came out a couple weeks back on Techne Records, Noizu's label. And I'm basically just going to be taking you guys through the different layers and how I put the track together, as well as like highlighting a couple different takeaways and some specific tips that you guys can use to apply to your own productions. So let's get right into it. I'll play you guys a little snippet of the track just so you can get a sense of how it sounds. So that's kind of the main like central drop part of the track. And I actually started this track off with a reference from an older Camel Fat song, kind of a more housey one. And it's not like a perfect analogy to this track, but I kind of liked the vibe of it, and I wanted to recreate, kind of just some of the elements and how they did the processing on the vocals. So I'll play that as well, so you can hear. Just try to listen to kind of just the general vibe, and then also the vocal, and you'll see the similarities between the reference and my track.
Blame me if I was a freak. Come prepared for what you seek, because it is not for the weak. Yeah, this is what you did to me.
So you can see it's kind of has a similar vibe, even though it's a little bit of a different style. So I listened to this track a lot while making my own track, just to kind of, get like a good frame of reference for, what kind of sounds to pick and just processing, etc. So, starting right off with some of the layers, I have the kick here. It's pretty simple. It's just a kick from like a Max Chapman pack. Sounds like this. And then I have some double kicks throughout, just to add some kind of variation and keep things interesting. I also have like some, double kick halfway through the drop. Just kind of, like I said, just keeps things interesting. It's a pretty simple sound. And I actually don't have much processing on it at all. I just have like a saturator. It's set to this like soft sine preset. The dry wet is taken down to 30, and just like literally 1 dB of drive, so it's barely, it's just kind of like saturating, adding a little bit more to the mids and highs. Not doing much though. And then I have this EQ that's taking out some of the mids, because I thought it sounded a little boxy, so you can hear. Definitely cleans it up a little bit if I increase that frequency range. I thought it was kind of just not so pleasant sounding, so I cut from it. And then I have this low cut that actually has an automation, so during certain parts of the track, I'm cutting the low end out of the kick, just as an arrangement tool to kind of create some build up. So, in the drop here, you can see it has the full low end, but here in the build up, low end is taken away. And it's just, it's just a really easy, quick arrangement tool. And then I have, actually, this EQ is not doing anything. I'm just using it as an analyzer for some of this bass processing, which I'll get to when we get to the bass. But, so that's the entire kick. It's pretty simple processing-wise. I like to err on the side of, like, choosing the right sounds that fit together and, just sound good out of the box, rather than finding a sound and throwing like 100 effects on just to try to get it to fit properly. Because the less processing you have to do, the better your mix will sound overall. So yeah, moving on to the drums. The drum section on its own sounds like this. Pretty simple, but has some cool, like, layers and percussion in there. So I tend to organize my drums into kind of like 3 separate folders. I'll do like obviously claps and hats just for the main, like, kind of top drums. And then I'll do like a percussion folder which just has anything else I add, like, just thrown into it. So just to break down the claps, first of all, I have like a center clap and left and right, pretty standard. Sounds like this. And then I have this additional texture clap. Just added some like nice like smack, so all together it sounds like this. And I actually have the whole clap group shifted off by 1 millisecond. And what that does is basically, without moving any of these, audio clips, it's gonna put all these 1 millisecond late. And what that does, in effect, is that it shifts the clap off so that the transient is not hitting at the exact same time as the kick. And that can make things just sound a little softer. And as you can see, this one I have by -1, so it's behind it's early -1 and then late -1. So this one is actually hitting at the same time as the kick. The other ones are, a millisecond later. So with the kick, just to kind of A/B that, that's regular. If I shift it off, you get sound kind of like this. So you can see it kind of just makes it sound a little more soft. That's a trick I use a lot, just to kind of separate the layers. And actually, there's no effects on any of these claps. I have a washout on the group, which comes in at various times, but no processing on the claps. Again, just like tried to find the right sounds. The hats, I have a couple more layers than the claps. I generally don't do this many layers, but I had like a couple in originally, and then I thought it was sounding kind of flat, so I added some more. But my 3 basic layers are these 3. So just kind of 2 like clickier, white noisier ones, and then 1 like 909. And then I have this fill one that comes in every other beat. And that helps create a call and response. So this was my original hat group. But I thought it was kind of flat sounding, so I added these 2 more layers afterwards. And so all together it creates this kind of thicker, layered hat sound. And then I just have some EQ on some of them, to take out like various frequencies, like, harsh highs, or just some like lows and mids that I didn't like, etc. So, but nothing crazy, pretty simple, not, no drastic EQing there. And ideally, if I had chosen better sounds, I wouldn't have needed, these EQs, but I ended up using them in the end. So that's my hats and claps. Sounds like this. Kind of has some, variation, and, it's interesting. It has dimension to it. It's not just, your standard like hats and claps repeating. And then I have a bunch of percussion layers here, which also really don't have many effects on them. So I have this top loop, a couple different top loops, and then some shakers, percussion, and rides, and that's kind of it. So on this top loop, I cut out some of the highs, and then I did this cool trick that you guys can use with LFO tool, where I set the rate to 1/16. I basically thought that the loop had kind of too much transient, too much click to it. And so what I did was set it to 1/16, so it's hitting on all the little busy transients. And then I added this little fade from the beginning, so just to show you what it sounds like with the LFO tool off. Back on. I'll just A/B it. Just makes it sound a little more smooth and helps get rid of some of those harsh like clicks, you know, that a lot of loops have. I have this loop too. Same thing, you know, I have that fade happening on the 16th notes. This one as well. This one really needed it. So that's kind of my loops together, just the percussion loops. Then I have some shakers, and these are panned a little bit, by the way. You know, center, left, and right, just to create some width in the drum group. Just some simple shaker layers. And I like to combine a bunch of shaker layers together because individually they can kind of sound like, you know, machine made and not too organic. But if you combine a bunch of shaker loops together, you can get kind of a more natural sounding shaker. Just has more dimension to it. And then finally I have this percussion layer that comes in halfway through the drop. One of these shakers has a sidechain on it, by the way. But yeah, so it's percussion layer, and then 2 ride layers. One is just kind of more standard ride from a Noizu pack, and then this one, almost like more of like a techno-y ride. So those sounds together sound like this. So it's just kind of like a thick, you know, group. And then I have this folder inside the percussion folder with some kind of fill sounds and effects. And these are just things I added, you know, kind of as ear candy, but they're not consistent layers that go the whole time like these ones. They're just, you know, little percussion sounds that come in and out as time goes. So like first I have this crash and the reverse crash, so it sounds like this. And the only reason I have them separated into 2 different channels is just so that I could put a delay on one of them and not the other. You can see there's a delay on this one. I also have this open hat sound, kind of an 808 one. Comes in at different points. I have this fill. And again, like really not much processing on any of these sounds. You know, the crash has a little EQ and delay and reverb, but a lot of these don't have much. I have this stick, which sounds like this. Then, you know, white noise layer, just kind of doing some rhythmic like patterns throughout. And then I have this hat that, you know, comes in at random times as well, just to add some like interesting rhythmic stuff. So overall sounds like this together. So you can see it's just little sounds. But altogether, the drums sound like kind of nice and busy and, you know, interesting, like this. So yeah, it's a nice little drum section. You know, I don't have any effects on these groups except for, you know, the main group overall. I had this nice chain that a friend of mine sent me. Just has some drum bus, you know, subtle drive and crunch, a little bit of compression with the transients increased, but the dry wet is decreased to like 10%, just so it's like subtle, you know, don't want to like over process, don't want to make things sound too squished or distorted or whatever. So yeah, just subtle drum bus. I have an EQ, which is cutting out some of the lows, but again, like subtly, try to pick the right sounds that don't necessarily have too much low end that needs to be cut out. Just like simple, simple processing. I have some of these highs cut out here. And then I have additionally a compressor which has a long attack time. And what that does is it lets the transients through before the compressor enacts, which, it can add some punch to the drums. So that's the bulk of my drum chain. And then I have Isotope Thermal, which is a really cool plugin. A lot of people use it for more like drastic kind of distortion and like sound designing stuff. But I find that it's really useful if you use it very subtly at like, 3% or whatever, 4%. Has a bunch of presets here. I just found one that sounded good. I messed with like the 2 parameters. This is like an XY axis of them. But, you could say I left it even just 50% for both. Like I didn't even fuck with it that much. You can go in here and see what it's actually doing. It's just like some distortion and width stuff. But honestly, I just found a preset that sounded good and then just decreased the percent. If I put it up at 100, you'll hear it's like way too harsh. But just adding, a little bit can just kind of add to the high end and really like nicely saturate the drums. So really cool plugin there. And then I have 2 send effects that I'm sending the drum group to. And one is a reverb that sounds like this. It's literally the default reverb, but with a short decay time. And what that does is it just helps add like some space and width to the drums without sounding like, they have reverb on them. So just to A/B, this is without it. Kind of sounds pretty dry and like, in the box. But then if you'll see that as I turn on this reverb here, it's going to add a lot of space. You can especially hear it in the claps, it just kind of adds some softness. And then I have a delay channel, which is doing like ghost percussion. Basically, it's just a delay. It's basically sending the entire drum group to this crazy delay that's at 100%. And then I have it sidechained and even more heavily EQ'd. So it's just kind of making these really subtle percussion hits that you can barely hear, but they're in the background and they're just kind of filling up the space. Honestly, it was a little bit of like production overkill. I probably didn't need it. Could have gotten away without it, but, it added. But yeah, you can hear it adds a little bit to the background. So that's my entire drum group. With the kick, it creates like a nice groove and just sounds nicely processed. So yeah,